Pistons have announced their preseason schedule, including a game at Michigan State against the visiting Phoenix Suns. Will Cade Cunningham make an all-star team? And who has the most to gain, the most to lose this preseason? All that and more on this edition of the Palace of Pistons Podcast, part of the Believe Network.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another exciting night of NBA basketball.
The Pistons are digging in. They got the depth. They got the big men. They got the better basketball team. No doubt about it.
Pistons need a three, and they have just under 3 seconds to do it. Here's Chauncey Billups. Here it is. He's got it. He's got it. Chauncey Billups hits the three. Overtime. Amazing.
Out of bounds. Detroit basketball.
Pistons fans, welcome back to Palace of Pistons Podcast, part of the Believe Network. I'm your host, Mike Anguilano. Joining me this week is Aaron Johnson. Aaron, how are you doing, my friend?
Doing good, Mike. The Pistons have announced their preseason schedule. The light is at the end of the tunnel. So ready for basketball to be back, and excited to talk about how much closer we're getting with today's show.
We're getting close. NFL starts in about 30 minutes from the recording of this show, which means the NBA is not far behind. And honestly, that kind of gets me right into like Christmas Day. Think about all of the Christmas Day games, and it just keeps spiraling on and on. We're entering like the best time of sports fandom with baseball playoffs coming back, basketball back, and then football. It's a good time. Even with the Pistons, it's a very, very exciting point of the season. And we are going to get into some preseason stuff. We're going to get into probably get into more of it as we get closer, but we're going to talk a little bit about who has the most to gain, who has the most to lose for training camp battle, since that's right around the corner. We're going to talk about Cade Cunningham and if he makes an all-star team, if this is finally the season, and then kind of riff, see where we go from there. But before we do get into it, I do want to thank our sponsor for this week's episode, and that is BetOnline. And BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for everything football. BetOnline has every stat, every matchup, and even live odds and spreads to bet on during games. And you think you know your stuff? Well, you can get in on a $200,000 mega contest and pick 5 games against the spread every week for your chance at weekly prizes and a share of $200,000. When the game's over, head on over to the online casino, get in on a game of blackjack or poker, or unwind with one of over 150 slots games. You can head on over to the website today, get in on the action. BetOnline, the game starts here. I reopened my sports betting account to fully get into NFL festivities with the Ravens and the Chiefs. I don't know if you've done the same.
Floodgates have opened. I was like off from gambling for a hot minute there. Baseball season, just like, it's fun at the beginning, and then it's like just kind of the same thing every day. And I just kind of fell out of it. But the start of college football, the start of the NFL, all the way back in, ton of bets out there, ton of money to be lost. That's just
a lot of money. A lot of money to be lost, but a lot of fun to be had, because even though it's tough to watch your parlay fail by like 60 rushing yards or 50 passing yards or whatever, it's still fun the whole way through. And certainly use BetOnline as your most trusted platform for everything football coming up this season. We also want to sort of plug our own outlets as well. The Palace of Pistons Substack is where you can find all of our written content and all of the links to our not written content, all of our podcasts. So please subscribe to our newsletter at palaceofpistons.com. You will not regret it. You'll get a weekly drive coming to your inbox every Monday. You'll get an article every Wednesday, and you'll get the podcast every Friday, and maybe something else here and there, as we see fit. But positional previews rather are on the horizon. We've already started kind of game planning those out, so you can be on the lookout for those. The Pistons have a ton of positional battles, a lot of rotational questions that we are going to start to get into this week. But please subscribe to our Substack. It does make a huge difference. You can find the link to that in the show notes for wherever you are listening to your podcast, or in the description if you're watching on YouTube. That's a good segue that I kind of didn't mean to make, but our first topic is going to be about the preseason. The Pistons have announced their preseason schedule. Begins on Sunday, October 6th, which is 1 month from when you're all going to be listening to this show. They're going to play the Milwaukee Bucks. They play the Suns twice, with one game being at the Breslin Center at Michigan State. They'll play Golden State, and they'll play the Cleveland Cavaliers. So, preseason and training camp. I can't believe we're already talking about this. It feels like we were just talking about Monty Williams and if he was going to remain the head coach. And obviously that didn't happen. But now we're talking about training camp and whatnot. So, Aaron, what are you most looking to see in the preseason and in training camp? You know,
Well,
there's a lot to be had by certain players here, and as these rotational battles start to take form.
Well, look, first off, I'm just glad we're able to talk about it because I'm very much ready for basketball to be back. And I mean, the Pistons come out with kind of a gauntlet of a preseason schedule. Looking at the teams that they play: Milwaukee, playoff team; Phoenix, playoff team; Cleveland, playoff team; Golden State, playoff team. Like, they are playing 4 really good teams in the preseason. There's no real like, hey, let's kind of figure things out. I mean, obviously it's the preseason and you're not going to be playing teams at 100%, in terms of effort, or probably all of their top players playing, but it's like they're still going to be playing good teams. And I think that's pretty cool. I'm not sure how the preseason scheduling works. I'm not sure if that's done by the league. It feels like maybe the teams have some sort of say in it. I think specifically like this home and home that the Pistons are doing with Phoenix. I think, it feels like maybe the teams have some sort of say in their preseason schedule. I know they get to dictate how many games they do play. I think like you can play 4, you can play 6. But it's great that we're talking about the preseason being back. And yeah, there's a lot to look at in the preseason. 5 games for Detroit, 5 games to get some sort of inclination of how they're going to look under this new regime, this new roster, helped being built by general manager Trajan Langdon, and this new roster being coached by new head coach J.B. Bickerstaff. A lot of new players to bring into the fold, a lot of questions to figure out about the core and the players surrounding it. So there's a lot to watch for. It's an exciting time. I think when you think about the preseason, you think about a lot of those back end roster guys getting an opportunity to maybe make a case for either making the roster or fighting their way into a rotation spot. So someone like Ron Holland really comes to mind for me. A rookie that on the outside looking in, it doesn't really look like he has a clear spot in the rotation. He's going to get minutes in the preseason. What does he do with those? Is he able to show that he's capable of maybe getting some minutes right away in the NBA? Or does he maybe look like it's going to take some time for him? Is he going to need some reps in the G League? Or is he just going to need to kind of sit on the bench for a little bit and watch and learn and practice with the team and kind of figure some things out there? I think another guy kind of in a similar vein, obviously more experienced, but Jaden Ivey, a guy that's been kind of wishy-washy in terms of where he stands in this Pistons core moving forward. Is he a core building piece? Is he the starting guard alongside Cade Cunningham? Or is he a super sixth man? Or is he a trade candidate to another team that maybe needs to bring in a young and fast-paced athletic guard, and the Pistons need to go after someone that fits a little bit better with the rest of the roster that they have outside of Ivy? I think there's a lot of pressure on him, and I think we'll start to see, how he responds to that and where he fits in the preseason. There should be plenty of opportunity, and I hope the Pistons spend a lot of the preseason starting to figure out if J.B. Bickerstaff can make things work between Cade Cunningham and Jaden Ivey. So a lot to watch for. Ron Holland and how he fits. I think the fitting, the potential of a Cade Cunningham, Jaden Ivey backcourt saga part 3 is it. Let's figure this out once and for all. So a lot of things to start to look forward to in preseason, and it's only a month away.
Yep, only 1 month out. I think you kind of hit on something that I don't think we really talked about in any of these pods, is that the Pistons added talent at the 3 major levels, and it's also where their 3 most poignant question marks are at. There's question marks around Jaden Ivey, as we've discussed a lot over the summer and really the last year. There's question marks about Jalen Duren and his durability to an extent, but his defensive IQ as well. And then there's questions about Asar Thompson as a shooter, not as a defender. We've pretty much got that figured out. And the Pistons added players to each of those 3 position areas. They've added Paul Reed as another big who has experience being both a bench big and a starting big, filling in for Joel Embiid. They've added a ton of wings that are going to push guys like Asar Thompson to maybe shoot more. Maybe because he's not a potent shooter, he's not going to get the minutes. And then, of course, they added guys that are going to push youngsters like Marcus Sasser and Jaden Ivey. They added vets that hopefully will be around to push those young guys to reach the heights that I think Detroit envisioned when they drafted all of them. So kind of an interesting thing. All three of those guys could find themselves, with reduced playing time because you've added veterans that are pushing them and they're just not up to the task. So kind of interesting. Who has the most to lose this preseason, do you think? Duran and Ivy have been constantly in trade talks. I think we talk about Jaden Ivey trade once a week for about 7 podcasts in a row. Does he have the most to lose? Does he have the most to gain? Like, what is your sense there with these guys?
Question. I mean, I think, if I had to make the pick right now, I think I'd say Jaden Ivey simply because, like, again, it just feels like there's so much pressure on him and on this organization to figure out, is he a part of this organization long term? And he's gonna have to play well right away to get that answer. Like, to figure out if he's a part of this court, he's got to show he can play with Cade Cunningham, or he's got to show he can produce off the bench and is okay with coming off the bench. I think there's a ton of pressure on that situation overall. Not saying like if he comes out and doesn't, kill it in preseason, like the world ends and the Pistons have to make their move then and there. But you'd like to go into the season having seen Cunningham and Ivy come back after an offseason where they've been training together and see if things can work, because this was the duo that, albeit the past regime brought in, but this was the duo that this franchise touted as the backcourt to take this team into the future and back to the championship level that this organization says they're capable of being at. So I think there's a ton of pressure on Ivy there. I think you can make the case for Jalen Duren having a ton to lose. But what about some of these guys, even the veterans that maybe don't have a clear-cut role in the rotation right now? Guys like Tim Hardaway Jr. I think Malik Beasley's in it, but maybe he's kind of on the fringe of the rotation right now. Some of these different guys that aren't your necessary core pieces that I feel like we talk about a ton. Maybe it's some of these newcomers in a rotation that seemingly has 12 to 13 guys capable of earning minutes. Maybe it's 2 or 3 of those guys that don't have the greatest preseasons and find themselves out of the rotation. Those guys could be Tim Hardaway Jr. Those guys could be someone like Marcus Sasser. I think there's a number of guys. Like, what loyalty does JB Bickerstaff have to Asar Thompson outside of, the organization drafting him? And it was a past regime that drafted him. Like, I'm not saying Asar Thompson's not capable of being in the rotation. Obviously, he should be. I think there's a large contingent of fans that believe he should be in the starting lineup for this team. But it's like, does Bickerstaff have that allegiance of the past regime that, Asar Thompson's automatically a core piece? He probably is either way because of his defensive talent. But I think all of the competition for those minutes on the wing are going to be a real interesting thing. I think Tobias Harris is starting for you at one of your forward spots. I think Simone Fontecchio is going to get heavy minutes there. But I think there's going to be a real battle between Tim Hardaway, Asar Thompson, Malik Beasley, Ron Holland. Like, all those guys are going to fight for some minutes, and only a couple of them can really get them unless the Pistons play 11-12 deep to start the year and let things figure themselves out after that.
And, it's been a few years since I've seen JB Bickerstaff in coaching a bad team to figure things out mode. But I wouldn't be surprised. Again, this is just what I've witnessed. He's going to go to his vets sooner than some others would have. He doesn't want to let young guys flounder out there. He was more than willing to put, Ricky Rubio in with Darius Garland, for example, for heavy minutes. He would yank Colin Sexton. He put Colin Sexton on the bench, which irked a lot of Cleveland fans. It made some of the other Cleveland fans like myself happy that he was in a different role, but JB has historically shown that he's more than willing to go to the veterans and yank the young guys if they're not producing. As for Asar Thompson, I compare him to Isaac Okoro, not because I think they're similar players. Asar Thompson's obviously got a higher ceiling than Isaac Okoro, but he's a defensive-minded, athletic guy who can't really shoot. So they kind of have similar makeups. And JB maybe was not the greatest at focusing on developing Isaac Okoro. I've screamed internally at get Isaac Okoro to run off ball like a madman because he's fast and athletic and can get downhill. Maybe JB has learned his lesson with that, and Asar will be doing those things. But that's the other kind of little piece is the coaching is going to be a lot different. You're not going to see all bench lineups probably. You're going to see some more staggering, which JB has done in the past. But that forward rotation is going to be challenging for him because you can't avoid Asar Thompson. The defense is too good. But he also can't fall in love with going to Tobias Harris, going to Paul Reed heavy at the four, whatever. He's going to have to find that balance. And I think that's going to be something to watch too, is those early rotations from him in the preseason, mixing and matching, seeing what sticks, because you have to find the right mix of shooting and playmaking.
Without saying it, you brought another storyline into my mind, but like Isaiah Stewart, it's another player that the plans probably have changed with this new regime and this new coaching staff taking over. I don't envision him starting, and now that they brought in Tobias Harris, and I don't envision him starting over Jalen Duren at the center spot. So where does the organization view him as a fit? Do they view him as a backup 5? Do they view him as a backup 4? If they view him as a backup 4, what does that mean for all of these other forwards that we've already talked about battling for minutes? If he's not a backup 5, does that mean Paul Reed's going to have a much bigger role than maybe we thought when the Pistons claimed him off of waivers? So there's just so many different storylines. And again, it goes back to you're dealing with a new coach that really doesn't have an allegiance to any of these guys. There's no, these guys have been with me on previous rosters or anything like that. Like, these are all new guys to him. He's going to play whoever puts him in the best position to win ball games as the head coach. So that's going to be really interesting. I mean, Isaiah Stewart in this past regime was talked about as this significant core piece. I think people have kind of come to the realization he's maybe still a part of the core, but he's kind of that bench player, brings the energy, brings that hustle, brings that attitude that you like. Not necessarily a core piece in terms of the talent that he has. And that's okay. He can still be a good player, but very interested to see how Isaiah Stewart fits under this new regime. I think that's just another under the radar storyline that in a year full of big storylines for the Pistons, like, we'll have to see how that one plays out.
Yeah, it's possible that Stewart's the odd man out and you're looking at trades. There was interest in him throughout the offseason. The Oklahoma City Thunder were a team interested in him. I don't think that's going to happen now that they've gone out and signed Isaiah Hartenstein, and they seem to have a pretty filled out roster. So is there another trade that presents itself? The New Orleans Pelicans had showed some interest as well, and they were looking for a backup big. So it's definitely one of the storylines to watch, because you're right. Isaiah Stewart was touted as this core piece that was just as important as Duren, Ivy, and Cade Cunningham. I don't think we felt that way at any point throughout his tenure here, that he was this core piece. He was being sort of even covered by local media as this core piece that's going to unlock the offense or something due to his shooting or ability to just play hard-nosed ball. The reality is he's probably not that stud, not even like stud, like good borderline solid, stretch four. He's probably somewhere like a Tristan Thompson, who is really high energy and can do some things that no one else on the team really is capable of doing in terms of energy and motor. I mean, Tristan Thompson would come into games and his motor was enough to, get solid 4 to 6 minutes out of him. Maybe he's something closer to that with the ability to shoot a 3 here or there. But I think the forward rotation is the most interesting. Do you agree or disagree?
Oh, I think it is for sure, just simply because of the sheer number of players that could earn minutes there. I mean, you're talking about at least 6 guys that have a case for minutes. and not all of them are going to be able to get him. So I think that's just as big as I think, the other big one being the Cunningham and Ivy fit together as the starting guards, the forwards, and how those minutes get shaken out there is just as interesting to me.
So what should the reaction be if and when, because Ron Holland is raw. We watched in the summer league. What should the reaction be when both of Detroit's picks in the draft are both playing in the G League an equal amount of time as they are in the NBA team, at least with regards to Holland? Not playing like on the roster. Clement's a little farther away, probably. He's also pretty raw, but what should the reaction be for Pistons fans if they see Holland, playing in the G League, not getting minutes, maybe not standing out right away?
So I definitely think Bobby Klintman will spend time in the G League this year. For the reasons we just talked about, there's so many guys that have a case for minutes, like especially when after he's been up with the team and practicing with the team for that first month of the year. The G League season starts in November. Like, send him down there at the beginning of the season. Let him get some reps in, assuming there aren't a bunch of injuries on the main roster and there's actually minutes for him up with the Pistons. But I think Clinton's a prime candidate to go down there, continue to work on his deficiencies, continue to develop, work with the Pistons staff. Ron Holland's a different animal, a different beast for me in that regard, because while I'm personally okay with him going down to the G League, considering the current roster situation the Pistons have, I don't know how likely it is. This is still a top 5 pick. It would be very untraditional, I would say, for a top 5 pick on a probably non-playoff team to be spending a ton of time in the G League. Maybe at the beginning of the season, in November for the G League, he goes down there for a little bit if he's just been up with the main roster and hasn't really found a spot in the rotation yet. Maybe they send him down there for a little bit, but I can't imagine he spends a whole ton of time down there, especially when you have to start thinking about, look, if this team's out of the playoff race come the trade deadline, they know they're going to move off some of these guys like a Tim Hardaway Jr. or Malik Beasley. Obviously, a ton of minutes then open up for someone like Ron Holland, who you'd probably want turn towards developing at that point in the season. So I would be okay if Holland ends up in the G League in November for a little bit. I know that would cause an absolute panic amongst the general fan base, but I don't think it would be the end of the world. I think the G League is a great, great tool. Obviously, Holland experienced that last year as a player down there, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I just don't know how likely it is that he spends a large chunk of time down there. I think it's much more realistic that Bobby Klintman spends a good chunk of time with the Crews this upcoming season.
And I don't disagree with that. I think it is pretty untraditional to have that high of a pick play in the G League, but 14 of the 30 first-round picks in the 2023 draft had been assigned to the G League. One of those being Jarris Walker, who was the 7th or 8th overall pick, maybe 8th. He was the 8th overall pick to Indiana. He was in the G League. I don't recall too much hubbub from Pacers fans on that. I mean, they had quite a logjam signing Obi Toppin and already having Miles Turner and several other bigs as well, and then trading for Pascal Siakam. But Walker was in the G League, and he was of a similar ilk in the draft process, the pre-draft process, as this really high upside kind of guy. Maybe not as high as Ron Holland was, but there's at least some level of precedence to putting him in the G League. Here is my stance. I agree. I don't think he's going to spend a whole lot of time in the G League. Should he? I mean, to me, I'd rather a guy play than wither away on the back end of the bench. But I'm kind of with you. I don't know how likely that is that they being the front office, I don't know how likely it is they're going to do that. There's still some weird stigma about the G League for some reason, but it wouldn't surprise me if he did sit on the bench, be around the organization, be around the vets, and the Pistons were fine with that.
Yeah, like I said, I think, you get him up with the main roster in October. The G League season starts in November. If he hasn't found his way into the rotation yet, it's a perfect opportunity to send him down for a few weeks, let him get some reps in. Then maybe you bring him back up and you try to get him into a few games and see what he looks like and see if he can, acclimate himself to the NBA game. And maybe you're then able to move forward with him, and it makes moving off of one of these guys that you brought in a little bit easier, and you can go get some value back for someone like Malik Beasley. I think that's obviously something that's already been talked about. As soon as the Pistons signed him, it was like, oh, Malik Beasley is going to be a great trade chip in February at the deadline. The Pistons will be able to flip him for something. But Ron Holland, if he's able to come in and prove he's capable of playing NBA minutes, makes that actually a lot more palatable than just saying, hey, Malik Beasley was brought in here for a season and he's going to play here and he's going to, be a part of trying to turn this team around and giving them a veteran in the locker room and on the court. But no, I think it's okay if Holland does spend some time in the G League. It's not the end of the world. Have to remember, yes, he's the 5th pick. This was an historically poor NBA draft. It's talked about, oh, the 5th pick in this draft is like picking, 15th or whatever. It's not like a traditional, picking 5 in the NBA draft. So it's okay if he goes down in the G League and spends some time there. It's not the end of the world.
And this was a historically poor draft. And the Pistons also picked a guy that most people thought could have been there at 14 or even later. So we'll just have to see how it plays out. It's a very interesting training camp battle. And look, ideally, Ron Holland jumps off the page and forces his way. That's what you really want to see. You want him to force his way into the rotation. That is a great problem to have. So we'll just have to see. We are about a month out, so the wait will not be too long. One of the guys that we're not going to have to wait too long with in making an all-star team is Cade Cunningham. Or is he going to make an all-star team this year? That's one of the questions that we're starting to see circulate for one reason or another. I think it's 2K ratings that people are starting to see them pop up, and they're thinking, why is this person not higher, or why is this person so high? Personally, I don't know why Jalen Green is higher than Darius Garland, but that's a different conversation on a different show. But anyway, I digress. Cade Cunningham played a very good season last year. He's obviously the cornerstone of this franchise. He's the building block of the future. He's going to be part of the next Pistons playoff team. But will he make an all-star team this year? And if he doesn't, is that considered a disappointment? The East has a lot of guards, a lot of very good guards too. He's going to have a very tough time doing that. But, would you be disappointed if he didn't make an all-star team at this point?
Look, there are a number of high-level guards in the Eastern Conference. Just riffing off the top of my head, Tyrese Maxey, Jalen Brunson, guys that didn't make it last year, LaMelo Ball, Trae Young.
I'm going to check, by the way, so you go.
There's Tyrese Halliburton as well. There's so many good guards in the Eastern Conference. Yet I do think Cade Cunningham will make the All-Star game this year. The sheer numbers that I feel he's going to be able to put up with an improved roster around him, the Pistons not being, amidst a significant losing streak running up to the All-Star break, the Pistons, maybe being a little bit more respectable in the wins-loss column. Like, there's a lot of ingredients there that I think make it easier to envision Cunningham being named to his first All-Star game this upcoming season. Look, if he doesn't, there's 2 reasons, 2 possible reasons. One, there's a lot of good guards, as we just mentioned, and he just couldn't get in over them, whether it's, being voted in by the coaches or not having the fan vote, whatever it is, he fell a little bit short there. Or he doesn't have a good year, and he struggles to score the ball efficiently. The turnover issue creeps back up. He can't get the Pistons in spots to win games. He falls short in those game-winning moments with the ball in his hands. And so, yeah, if we're talking about, Cunningham's having a year of regression, he's struggling to perform at a high level, he's making you concerned about the max contract he just signed, then yeah, you'd probably be pretty disappointed. But look, I think you can look at a lot of guards, and you can look at a lot of players overall that don't end up making the All-Star team, but are really good players year in and year out. So I'm not going to be, super, super concerned if Cunningham doesn't make it and he's having a really good year and the Pistons just can't keep up in the win-loss column with other teams to, be deemed a team worthy of having an All-Star. But yeah, if Cunningham regresses or is having a bad year, you're probably concerned, and rightfully so. Not because he didn't make the All-Star team, though, because you just signed him to a significant long-term max contract. So I'd be worried about a lot more than, will Cade Cunningham make the All-Star team? If he's having a bad season. So, but like I said, I think the ingredients set up Cade to have an All-Star year. I think people across the board are expecting a big season from Cade Cunningham. I've seen some major outlets talking about him as a candidate to make the All-Star team. I've seen him, being placed in, I think it's, most improved player of the year rankings. I think he's like a top 3 to 5 candidate to win that award. So I think people are expecting a big season for Cunningham. And if they are, I think he's going to get that recognition throughout the year. Obviously, a big way in getting that recognition would be getting named to the All-Star team, which I do think is going to happen.
So the All-Stars for the East last year, the guards, Tyrese Halliburton, Damian Lillard, Jalen Brunson, Tyrese Maxey, Donovan Mitchell, and Trae Young. Trae Young was a replacement for Joel Embiid, who was injured. So
a good group. And you still have LaMelo Ball in that mix. I don't know what Scotty Barnes is going to qualify as this year. I know he was playing a lot of guard for them, last year. Now they have Emmanuel quickly, so I don't know exactly how to work with that.
But they had him listed as a forward because he made his first All-Star team last year.
Okay. But point being, a lot of good guards. I think Cunningham, if he's the player we think he's going to be in that mix this year. Or at least he should be. And I think he's going to get the nod.
Yeah, I would be disappointed if he wasn't in the discussion. Some horrible things have happened if that's the case. But there are some guys who, weren't listed here. Just off the top of my head, Drew Holiday and Derek White seem to be fan favorites for everybody. Also coming from the defending champion Celtics. Darius Garland dropped off from being an All-Star. That's another guy that is probably due for a big season. Zach LaVine probably past his prime to do that, but another guy who's seemingly put his name into the mix for being an All-Star. So there are guys that, were injured last year, didn't play as well, that could be coming back up. But I'd be disappointed if he wasn't in the discussion. If he doesn't make it, it doesn't matter to me. I mean, the All-Star selection process is very heavily critiqued by a lot of people. The fan vote is heavily critiqued by a lot of people. I don't necessarily think it's indicative. I mean, do you remember when oh no, who's the Golden State Warriors center that I just lost his name?
Zaza Pachulia?
Yes, Zaza Pachulia, who I think was like fourth.
Former Piston. Zaza Pachulia, mind you.
Sorry, yes, former Piston. Also stepped on Kawhi Leonard's Zaza Pachulia. But he was like third in All-Star voting because his entire home country was voting. So I don't know. It's not make or break for me. You, of course, want to see Cade Cunningham firmly in the discussion and make an All-Star team, but it's not the end of the world to me. I also don't think it's necessarily totally indicative of the Pistons being this awesome team either.
How about this? I think it's easiest to look at, is he in the discussion? If he's in the discussion and doesn't get it because, there's only so many spots and there's so many good guards in the East, that's one thing. If he's not in the discussion whatsoever, that's where I think the conversation gets a little different. I think that's the best way to put it, the best way to center, the question and the answer for those listening.
Yeah, I think that's the best way to put it. Whether he makes it or not, the important part is that he's in the discussion. That's growth, improvement, which is all that we could hope for. I don't know about you, but All-Star festivities have just completely I like them, but then when it's time to watch them, I think I really don't know if I want to watch this.
Not in practice. And I care much more about who's named to the team than the actual game or the actual events themselves. I think it's just you think of when you think of player resumes, long-term, Hall of Fame ballots, and things like that. Those are the things that end up mattering. Yes, did they win championships? Did they win finals MVPs? Did they win? Did they make all NBA rosters? How many All-Star games did they make? The 6, 8, 10, 12, 14-time All-Star. That's the stuff that you think about when you think about the greats, and those are the players that have the biggest impact on the game long-term. Obviously, if you have a franchise player that you're building around, the expectation that he's capable of making an All-Star game, not just once, but multiple times in their career.
Yeah, essentially. Yeah. And it is the accolade first. The score is like 180 to 175. It's fun to watch. But
I think most people would agree. I think they care more about, is their team's, top player named to the game. I think they care way more about that than the actual game itself. They don't care about watching that guy in the All-Star game. They just care if he's named to the team because that's, a way to show, the rest of the fan bases across the league, like, hey, look, our guy's this good. We have an All-Star. You don't have an All-Star. Like, when you can
right.
go to those player debates, who's better, Damian Lillard or whoever, like, oh, well, Damian Lillard's made the All-Star game this many times, and this guy's only made it this many times, so Damian Lillard's better because he has more All-Star appearances. Like, that's the kind of stuff that I think like general fans care about because they can pull that kind of stuff out. Just it's just no one cares about the game from a standpoint of like watching the competition. It's guys playing pickup ball, and who really cares about that outside of being able to see cool, good players do cool things and like team up with guys that they normally wouldn't get to. Nobody's actually watching for like, oh, dude, these guys are about to play a great game, a meaningful game. Like it's going to be highly competitive. I don't think anyone cares about that as much as like, is there a guy making the All-Star team?
Watching the highlights is, just as enjoyable for me. Seeing the alley-oops, or even the Rising Stars game. Wasn't it Dion Waiters and somebody were going head to head? Maybe.
Was it Brandon Knight or was it Tim Hardaway Jr.? I think
it was Tim Hardaway Jr. Brandon Knight got his ankles broken.
Tim Hardaway Jr. as well. Tim Hardaway Jr. was a mercenary in the Rising Stars games.
Yes, it was Tim Hardaway Jr., but I think it was in that game that Kyrie Irving slid Brandon Knight's ankles out from underneath him.
Yeah, there was a number of players that just like went back and forth. It probably happens every year at this point, but I definitely remember Brandon Knight doing it with, I think it was Kyrie, and then Tim Hardaway and Dion Waiters did it. Like some great back and forth that like are etched in my mind for forever, unfortunately.
I believed in Dion Waiters, and I'm not ashamed to admit that.
Hey,
I was a believer.
Several Rising Stars games MVPs, Andre Drummond and future All-Star Cade Cunningham.
That's very true. Aaron, that's both topics that we have for today. Do you have anything else to add for all of the listeners?
No, let's have a great NFL season. Super excited for it to get started. Yes, I am on the Detroit Lions Super Bowl bandwagon. Going to be hopefully a really fun year for them. Super excited to see that get underway. But before everyone goes, look, wherever you're watching or listening from, need your help. Hit the subscribe button, hit the follow button, hit the like button, leave us a 5-star review, a 5-star rating. It all helps us tremendously. We continue to grow the podcast as we get closer and closer to the start of the new season. Please take the 10, 20, 30 seconds that it takes to do those things, because it really does help us out, and it means a lot. And we hope you're enjoying the content, right? It's not been an easy last month in terms of getting content to talk about. We're trying to do our best there. I know we missed a show a few weeks back. I did a solo show last week, but trying to find some things to discuss as well. So if you guys have anything that you want us to talk about, definitely let us know in the comments below. But appreciate your support. We've seen a lot of growth this off season. It's been really cool to see all these people coming on and enjoying the show. So appreciate you and hope you continue to support us along the way.
Yes, we appreciate all of the support. Subscribing, interacting, leaving comments on YouTube. It all adds up and it all means plenty to us. As for the NFL, I'm on the Sam Laporta bandwagon. So after a recent trade, I'm very pro Sam Laporta, which means I'm very pro Detroit Lions.
We'll have to give some fantasy football, Palace of Pistons fantasy football league updates throughout the podcast year. We'll have to just kind of loop everyone in every once in a while. It's going to be a highly competitive league this year. Really excited for that to get underway as well.
Yes, I received a very startling trade offer from somebody that to me is an egregious offer. I'm gonna say it on the show so that anybody in the comments wants to be like, well, that is a horrible trade, and you can give your opinion on it, because I made another just outrageous trade a few days ago at 12 o'clock at night, which nothing good ever happens past like 11:45 at night, and I got really nervous about that. I was offered Ramondre Stevenson, Zach Charbonnet, and Demario Douglas for Chase Brown, Cortland Sutton, and Jalen Warren.
You didn't do that, right?
Of course not.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of interesting
I
trades out there. Mike and I were in advanced talks on a deal, but he found a deal elsewhere. And look, I'll be honest, I think he made a good trade. But yeah, we were in advanced talks, and the two co-hosts were trying to come to a deal.
we do an auction for all of the listeners. And if you don't do an auction draft is the most engaged you'll ever be doing any fantasy sport, anything. It's constantly having to keep up. And I was in the middle of driving, and I missed Pat Freiermuth for $1. That would have solved all my problems. I could have kept all my depth if I would have offered $2 for Pat Freiermuth as opposed to nothing because I was driving. So that's really the whole issue here. And that forced me to trade away all my depth for Sam Laporta, Jalen Waddle, and Michigan Wolverine Blake Corum. So
that was a really good deal for you. So I wouldn't complain too hard, because I don't think we would have made an agreement similar to that. I think ours was going to be a much smaller type of trade. I think you came out of that looking really good. So
we'll see.
You will be a team to beat, as I feel like you always are in the Palace of Pistons League. You are always one of the top teams in the league. So I am I'm coming out for blood this year. I have not won the Palace of Pistons fantasy football league yet. It is on my to-do list, and I am hoping to do that this year.
Have you made the playoffs every year?
I was in it last year. I know that. I honestly,
yeah.
I think I missed it maybe 2 years ago.
I think the only two teams to make it all 3 years so far is Donovan and myself.
Well, I'm gonna do my best to win this year. I like the team in the Palace of Pistons League. So
I like the team that you have too. I'm sure that we'll be talking about this throughout the season, as it's sort of the best bang for your buck, $50 that I spend every year, is I get much more than $50 worth of value out of this league. But this isn't a fantasy football podcast. So, Aaron, any final words before we wrap up the show?
No, man. We'll see you guys next week. Appreciate you listening.
Yes, we'll see you all next week. And again, if you subscribe to us on Substack, you're going to get content from us sooner. You're going to get the weekly drive on Monday morning written by yours truly, and then you're going to get an article on Wednesday leading up to the podcast on Friday. So again, if you have not subscribed in Substack, please do so. You can do so in the show notes of wherever you get your podcast, or if you're listening on YouTube, in the description. For my co-host, Aaron Johnson, I am Mike Anguilano. Thank you so much for joining us in this week's edition of the Palace of Pistons Podcast, part of the Believe Network and presented by BetOnline. And we'll see you all next time.